You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
Indigenous activist and documentary filmmaker Ivy MacDonald is a study in straddling multiple worlds, marrying sometimes contrary identities to create one, quote, beautiful Blackfeet bitch. Born on the Blackfeet Reservation in Browning, Montana, Ivy is defined by a home as much about place as people. And while her identification with the LGBTQ community would presumably further fracture an identity already meshed in the space between conflicting perspectives, she owns her voice and the range of presence and purpose she embodies as a powerful queer Indigenous woman in a world intent on marginalization. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and in this podcast, Indigenous documentary filmmaker Ivy MacDonald and I consider the complexities of identity, the continued missing and murdered Indigenous women crisis, MMIW, and the unanswered question of Native reconciliation. We're with Ivy MacDonald. She's a Indigenous activist and filmmaker. How else do you describe yourself?
Beautiful bitch. Beautiful Blackfeet bitch. I don't know.
I like that. Beautiful
yeah.
Blackfeet bitch.
I really don't have any other identities besides being queer, being obsessed with movies, being Blackfeet, like being an activist. That's kind of my whole thing.
That's a pretty good set of characteristics.
Yeah, it definitely is.
What kind of toys did you have growing up?
So my favorite toy was a big white gorilla that held like a yellow banana. It was big. It was like as big as me, but I would just pack it around all the time and didn't really have, I mean, I had toys and stuff, but I was mostly outside playing like basketball or hide and seek and shit.
Are there three of you?
There's four. My older sister, Nicole, and then my younger sister, Twyla. We're always super close. We just like, there were some times where we were pretty, we were just kind of rough res kids, like pretty funny. So we just, we had siblings fight and we just kind of do whatever.
Tell me more about your parents.
My parents are amazing. They've sacrificed a lot for us and have done so much for us and continued to. It's funny, I always tell myself I'm like late 20s baby because I call my parents like every single day and I FaceTime them every single day and family is like my whole. I love them.
I guess with my parents, I don't see them that often. They live in Colorado, and every time I see them, I just see them just a little bit older than the last time. That's really struck me in the last probably, I don't know, as long as I can remember to date, years at least, where I just want to make all the times with them special and great.
It definitely hits you more, or it's been hitting me more, just they've been with me my whole life and sort of this like idea or thing of like not really wanting to think about it, but knowing that like, someday they won't be here. And it's probably the scariest fucking thing I could possibly think of.
Yeah, totally.
Like our family is extremely close. And so like it would be monumental, like even if an extended family member like my grandma or our family's so huge too that like any part that is like gone is a significant blow. And we actually just had a cousin who died a couple days ago. And so it's sort of like, I haven't really processed it yet. But, I remember growing up with her and like playing with her and seeing her when we'd go back to Browning and stuff. And so knowing that, she's not here anymore, it's kind of like, damn.
I'm really sorry. It's hard when it's that recent. There's kind of like a shock still to digest it.
Yeah, definitely.
So you talked about the reservation. What reservation did your family live on?
The Blackfeet Reservation.
In Browning?
Yeah.
How did they get there?
Colonizers.
Where were they originally?
They were both born and raised there in Browning. Yeah, they've lived there. My mom moved around a little bit. She moved between Montana and Arizona. And then my dad just lived there pretty much his whole life up until he went to school a little bit in like Missoula. They lived there pretty much off and on their whole life.
Is that traditionally Blackfeet country?
Yeah, kind of up like by Glacier. It goes from like into Canada too. So like the Blackfeet Reservation sort of goes into Canada and then comes down.
I've heard the Canadian are the Blackfoot.
Yeah.
And in the United States is the Blackfeet.
Yeah.
What makes that distinction? Just being in separate countries, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of different aspects into that sort of different tribes that you encounter. They're very similar, but the language is different a little bit. There's like certain words that are the same, and then there's like words that are different. Some of the traditions are different, but yeah, it's just kind of like the space that they ended up in.
What sort of education did you have?
It's interesting talking about that because I grew up on reservations. So I was born in Browning, and then when I was like 3, we moved to Hawaii for almost 2 years. My dad got his master's at the University of Hawaii. Then we moved back to Browning. It's interesting. I always like talk about the fact that like we kind of moved around a lot. So like when we came back from Hawaii, we lived there until I was like 12, and then we moved to Parker, Arizona, which is on another reservation. Then we moved to Bemidji, Minnesota, and then back to Chandler, Arizona. So like my education was interesting in a way that I grew up going to school on like a lot of reservations, and it probably wasn't until I was like in Bemidji, it was a border town where sort of this like white, like dominating white culture was there. And I went to school there my sophomore year, and then my junior year, because a lot of like different factors, I ended up going back to a res school in Cass Lake for a year, my junior year. So I went to 4 different high schools.
Is there a lot of that in Indigenous culture? Do a lot of families hop around to different reservations? Is that common?
Not really. The only reason we did is because my parents both worked for IHS. And so they just kind of moved where like they got a raise and there was like a job.
Okay, what is the IHS?
Indian Health Service.
What do they do for them?
My dad was a like public health educator, and then my mom's she pretty much hires like all of the new people coming into IHS around the country.
Is it all Indigenous people, or do people from other cultures come in? And
there's like white doctors that they hire at different hospitals on the reses and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily like all Indigenous people that work there.
Yeah, okay. You spent some time at 4 different high schools and then went to college in Missoula?
Yeah, I got my BFA in digital filmmaking there.
And horror.
Yeah, my whole career in college was pretty much like doing short horror movies, writing scripts. And then it wasn't until like my last year of school where I actually kind of dove deep into like documentary and stuff.
I met you and your brother Ivan a few summers ago on the Blackfeet Reservation. What were you two doing there?
We were shooting for a film called When They Were Here, which is a documentary about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls crisis in Montana.
And at the time, Kimberly Loring, Heavy Runner, had planned a rally for her sister Ashley.
Yeah, we were shooting that. Kimberly is actually a relative of ours, and we approached her about being in the film to get Ashley's story out, and she's incredible. She's done so many interviews and is kind of like the forefront of the crisis, so like she's done so much, and yeah, she was just doing a rally, so we decided to shoot it.
And we went out, you had the ESPN crew with their huge drone when we went searching that one day. How many searches for Ashley did you go on?
I've probably been on at least 12 or more.
Is there a time where you were close or felt the most energy around finding her?
It's kind of hard to say. I guess it's, there's so much stuff going on with like rumors. We follow Kimberly's lead. It is hard because it's this idea of like searching is like you go out and search and then you're like, okay, well, we didn't find her. But it's like very devastating, when you go out and you're not finding anything and you're with Kimberly's family. And, mostly it's just her, like mostly just her and her family, like 6 or 7 people helping search in a span of miles. It's sad.
You brought up rumors. There are different ways in MMIW and MMIP where people go missing or are murdered by human trafficking or sex trafficking, but it's also sometimes potentially within the tribe. Is that the case? Is that what the rumors are?
Yeah, more or less. It's just sort of, there's people in Browning who sort of know what happened, or that's what Kimberly feels is like people know what happened to Ashley, where she's at. And so it's just sort of her asking those questions and, trying to demand answers.
Have you searched for anyone else other than Ashley?
Yeah, I've done a couple searches with Jermaine Charlot's family in Missoula.
Yeah, okay. Jermaine Charlot's family was at the rally at the Blackfeet Reservation. What are some of the statistics around it in Montana?
Indigenous women, make up over 40% of the population, 80% of those who've gone missing or been murdered. And so it's sort of this like disproportionate rate that Indigenous women are going missing and being murdered compared to like any other ethnic group in Montana.
While I was up there, I learned that the statistic was similar with men missing, like Matthew Grant. Tell me a little more about when they were here and kind of yours and Ivan's role in it.
When they were here started my last semester of college. I took a documentary class and Ivan was getting his master's the same year, and he just kind of approached me and was like, hey, do you think we could do a short film on this topic? And at that time, Bonnie Three Irons, who is in our film, she went missing on the Crow Reservation and was found murdered like a couple days later. And someone in his class, another Indigenous person from his class, was like, hey, you know, maybe this woman was just found, like maybe you could do something on this. And so he approached me with the idea for when they were here, and so we just kind of collaborated. And then we interviewed my Uncle Kenny, still smoking, whose daughter, Monica, was kidnapped and murdered from the Blackfeet Reservation when she was 7 years old back in the 70s. And we interviewed Nicole Walks Along, whose mother, Lynette Keener, was murdered in the Super 8 hotel in Missoula, Montana. So we did like a 20-minute short, and kind of over the years we did that in 2017, and over the years we found out sort of that when you looked up like MMIW documentaries, ours was kind of like the only documentary in the US. They had one other one in Canada, but you know, it was just like a short, and then it just kind of blew up into us doing like a full production. And I think our roles with it are just letting the family talk about their loved ones, how they want them to be remembered. And, you know, with Indigenous people, remembrance and memory is like how we keep people alive. You know, we tell stories, we laugh, we cry. And so I think our roles are just trying to, you know, raise awareness, but also like give these women and girls sense of humanity, because they often don't get that, you know, in their life and also in death. Like with Lynette Keener, when she was murdered, a paper in Missoula just reported that she was just a housekeeper who was killed. Like, that was it. That's all they said about her. And so...
Not any context or...
Nothing.
Anything about her culture.
Yeah, like, it was just a housekeeper murdered, and that's what she was simplified to, was just a housekeeper. Yet, they didn't talk about the fact that she had a loving family, you know, grandkids, all of this stuff. It was just...
That's heartbreaking. This film, when we were here, documentary started as a shorter project while you were in school. And what's the process of it now? Where are you at?
We're sort of like in that weird limbo state of being like ready for production, but still kind of in development, you know, because of COVID and stuff. It's been kind of hard to like film and stuff, but I've been doing a lot of reworking the treatment and sort of really diving into sort of what we're doing with the film and how we want it to be. It's actually been a blessing that we've been able to kind of stop, because, you know, we had so much momentum, all of this stuff. So it's been nice since the pandemic, that sounds weird, but since the pandemic happened, to kind of like step back and, you know, recharge, really step back from the story and try to figure out like all of the ins and outs of what the film really is.
And the pandemic just slowed it down, and you had all this momentum and probably content and B-roll that you were still building, but it might have been overwhelming, and it gave you this breath to just regroup.
Yeah, as an Indigenous woman, doing a story like this, it takes a toll. I feel like I've been, over the last, 7-8 months since this happened, sort of like healing in a way, and sort of really understanding, and I wouldn't say recharging, but kind of figuring out too, like, my role as an Indigenous woman, what does that mean for this film?
Almost a gift, also, just the interpretation that you bring to it and in your own discovery of yourself. Maybe not discovery, but it sounds like you're diving in maybe more deeply.
I guess take, for example, like, we shot with Kimberly last summer, and the place where we were shooting was, like, very treacherous. There was a lot of mosquitoes, like, it's just out in the wilderness. It was the first time we ever shot with Kimberly while she was searching. It was extremely hard for me to, like, film and be, like, a filmmaker in that space, But then on the other flip side, it's like, well, I'm looking for my cousin. So I couldn't really like focus on shooting. And so I had our producer and our still photographer kind of take over because I couldn't really focus on nothing but trying to look for something or, trying to help Kimberly and stuff. So it's sort of like in that space, it was hard to break away from being like an Indigenous woman searching for her relative and then trying to do a film about it. So it was kind of, I had to like have someone else take over because I couldn't really focus on the film at all.
Yeah, I can see that. Something so close, probably that you want to be completely present for rather than focusing on apertures and just framing.
Yeah, especially because we've gone on like so many searches with Kimberly, sort of you have to be present in that space. You have to kind of give your whole energy into like trying to find, Ashley and stuff, or find the person who is missing. And when you're distracted, it sort of takes away from what you're really doing there,
Yeah, kind of a sacred space. What do you think when you see white people on the reservation?
I don't know. It's funny because like our whole life revolved around our family and, our little space in Browning where it was sort of, people would come in a lot from going to Glacier, Glacier National Park. We'd go to Glacier. I don't really know how to answer that question. It's sort of like, I guess now that I'm older, I see white people around like Indian days and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny to like people watch and see how they react to certain things. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that.
Part of this topic today and tomorrow we're recording is the debate between tribalism and globalism. And there's this reconciliation piece of colonization or settling. There have been many different iterations and romantic stories told by the United States on its development. And I get the sense that it hasn't been reconciled.
Not at all. No.
We're talking about the reservations. Should reservations exist?
Short answer, no. They shouldn't have been put in place in the first place. But I think it's sort of this like, that's our only space to not be touched by outside colonization. But for me, like, no, I don't think so. But, on the flip side, it's sort of like, okay, well, we have our own little kind of world type of thing here. But sadly, it's because of colonization.
So, no, it shouldn't exist. But since the only option is to assimilate, not everybody wants to assimilate. And so where do they go? Where do the people go who don't want to lose their identity go? And that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
How does white culture, who didn't do the action, reconcile this?
I don't know if there's any like easy answer for that.
What about like you personally? What is a step that you see that's meaningful?
I was just talking about this actually with a friend, but we were talking more specifically about like the Blackfeet, sort of the, like giving, Glacier National Park back to the Blackfeet and sort of like having them, I don't know, like take care of it, or in a sense that like the space where that is. I remember growing up and we'd always go to Glacier. And I remember one time we were at our favorite swimming spot in Upper Two Medicine. And we were swimming, we were kids, we were swimming and like the adults were on the shore. We ended up like swimming over to like this like little, it wasn't an island type of thing, but it was like this part of land. And then this like white lady came up and was like, "You're not supposed to be over there, blah, blah, blah." And my aunt looked at her and she's like, "Fuck you." Like, they're Blackfeet, like you get the fuck off our land type of thing. She's like, "This is their land." And the lady was like so flabbergasted that something like that happened. Yeah, it was just like a old white lady. But yeah, like even like that, like spaces like that where that's our homeland, you still have people who are like, "Don't be over there," like don't do that type of thing. And it's like, what the fuck? This is our land. Like we can do whatever the fuck we want.
So it would be a piece to reconciliation would be to give back these sacred places. And I've heard you use the term being stewards of it again. I think that like the Black Hills maybe for the Lakota would be a similar story.
Yeah, they just had during like the whole when Trump tried to visit and stuff, they had like a couple of like activists and stuff went up to Mount Rushmore and, block the road. And that stuff, like, it's so funny when, like, Indigenous people try and, like, just protect or, like, stop things from coming in or stuff like that. It's always seen as, like, a radical movement. With, like, Standing Rock, it was, like, this whole big thing where it's like, no, literally, we just don't want the water to get fucked up, like, and the sacred spot to be ruined. And it's, like, this whole, like, people are arrested, people are gassed, all of this shit.
Did it need to be radical for the attention? Was the attention that Standing Rock got good?
I think it did. I mean, that's the thing is, like, colonizers and white people are so scared of people of color having power that they'll do anything to try and stop that, which is reasons why people were hurt at Standing Rock. Because of the brutality that white people bring into spaces like that, it's sort of like we have to kind of protect ourselves too, but we're not here to try and kill anyone or anything like that. We just want to be seen and want to, have places that are ours and that are clean and they're sacred spaces. Like, this is a place where people, like the Lakota people, have been there for hundreds of thousands of years. And so it's like, sometimes I don't even know, I don't have words for it because it should just be like automatically like, yeah, people don't get that.
It eventually worked out though.
Standing Rock?
Yeah. We went twice for a research trip. We hosted a debate around it. It was interesting. There are so many supplies and support of white people and just all sorts of other cultures. And I remember this schoolhouse being built because everyone was planning on staying there for the long term. And it just reminded me of this, like, a recolonizing of Standing Rock. It was like a settlement because there were so many people there and they were there for the long term and they were building buildings and schoolhouses.
I think I've seen some pictures of that. I mean, it turned into like this massive camp. A relative of mine, like, he was there, I think, all throughout the winter. And I remember him telling me, like, at one point, he's like, I think I'm immune to pepper spray and stuff like that because I was gassed so much on the front lines that I just, like, it didn't bother me after a while.
There were rabble-rousers there. I saw, I don't know, I think it takes a certain provocation maybe. Like, riots are often the voice of the unheard. And so there's a certain gaslighting that I think white culture might put on extreme actions that happened at Standing Rock. It sounds like gaslighting to me, where we would just say, oh, you can protest, but if you do something extreme, then it's too far. But if it's not extreme, then no one will listen.
Yeah.
We went over a little bit of this. So the national parks, would that be the only step, or would it be eventually become all of the land back as part of the land back movement? Would it ever end?
I don't know. I think, like I was telling you the other day that we were talking, it's hard to try and, like, picture it in a way just because so much so Indigenous people are always left out of conversations and, like, the mainstream media, that I don't know if it will ever truly be a thing that happens. You would like to think it. I was thinking about this on the way over, sort of this idea of, like, when white people say land back or, like, give land acknowledgements, it's kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say untrue, but it's sort of, I don't even know the right word.
To me, it seems disingenuous.
Yeah, disingenuous. But when it's coming from an Indigenous person, it's sort of like, fuck yeah. Like I was telling you when we first talked about this, my friend Iku posted something about, like, don't just say land acknowledgements, like, actually give back to the people or give something. And I totally agree with that, where it's sort of like, you could be like, oh, we're standing on, in Missoula, like, we're standing on Salish territory. And that's it. Like, okay, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to do anything else besides just say that?
Is do something broad, like more broad than giving land back?
When you talk about land back, I always talk about sort of the correlation between, like, land back and MMIW. Personally for me, because I'm so in the topic, there was a rally a couple months ago for Jermaine Charlo that her family put on in Missoula, and people showed up and, people had signs that said, like, land back. And I think it's just showing up to places and acknowledging that, the land that you stand on, there's a continuous genocide that's still going on.
The systemic culture that we've created has caused the damage to continue.
Yeah, it's still continuing to devastate our people in more ways than one.
We talked about a little bit ago about public lands and what that means to white culture and what that meant to Indigenous culture. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I
mean, I wouldn't say radical, but I'm very, like, kind of stubborn and, I'll just kind of say what's on my mind type of person. So land back would literally being like people going back, to Europe and shit like that and being like, leave us alone. But in white culture, I think it's just like this acknowledgement of what you can do and what you should do. Like when you go on to a reservation, respecting the space, respecting the people around, and sort of this idea of doing anything you could possibly can to sort of trying to acknowledge and doing research on like the land that you're standing on, even if it's like public or like anything like that.
Knowing the history of public land, of whose it once was.
Yeah, sort of whose it once was, like what happened, like the history, and if there was like certain things that happened on that land specifically, or knowing where you're at. Anywhere you're on Indigenous land regardless.
And so it being public land that represents what Indigenous culture would have been?
Sort of. I don't know, doing your research as a white person and understanding, like, if you're talking about public lands, like, where are those public lands at, and knowing sort of like, well, who was there first?
Yeah. Is diversity good? Do you think diversity is good?
In what way?
What came to your mind first?
Do you mean diversity in, like, being diverse in culture, or, like, being... Yeah, I mean, I think people learn from everyone. I think that's the beauty about being human, is that you can learn from everyone, and you can learn from all walks of life, or sort of just have this broad idea of what it is. You know, it can only go so far if you want to do that.
Is diversity globalism? Is it possible to have diversity being a tribe, or is it globalism?
Yeah, I think so. Being diverse and sort of like... For me, being, you know, the Indigenous person trying to navigate a world that is built against me, and being diverse in a way that, like, I know how to, like, interact in certain spaces. I know how to, like, keep myself safe as much as I can, and sort of, like, knowing, I guess, how to be in a white world, but also, like, not being completely drawn into it or, like, affected by it.
So a balance of keeping that tribal heritage, but also accessing the globalized society that you basically have to participate in.
Mm-hmm. I always say that, like, I grew up very privileged in a way that my family and my extended family were traditional Blackfeet. So I grew up doing ceremonies. That's always a part of me. I have certain things, obviously, that being Blackfeet, being Indigenous, and knowing sort of my culture as in depth as I know it, and sort of like all of this stuff encompasses sort of how I live my life now, which is why I tell my friends not to whistle at night.
You tell your friends not to whistle at night?
Yeah, we're not supposed to.
Why not?
Because it calls bad things, like ghosts, and we call them guganons.
It seems like something you would do being a horror fan. So diversity being good, if you were a tribe, would you prefer to be isolated as a tribe?
As a tribe, I think, yeah. Because our culture was so lost and just the damage that has happened to it, I think it's good to hold on to that as long as possible and not have like outside influences. But outside of that, I think it's good to be diverse in like your everyday life, but not, you know, culturally or anything like that, if that makes sense.
You found kind of a blend that you have to take part in. Would you choose that? Would you choose to participate in Western culture still if you had the opportunity to be immersed in Blackfeet culture again?
Yeah. My dream life would just to be like back home in Browning, spend most of my time there, but, you know, like film periodically, or like still create art, to build like a huge house and have all my family move in, and just like us living in a space where, you know, like we're all together, and that's all our like tight-knit type of group and stuff. And so it's nice going back because my uncle owns a ranch in Badger Creek, kind of below Ghost Ridge, our Starvation Hill. When I go back there, that's exactly what it feels like. It's just like, that's where I want to be. I want to be there. I could care less what's going on outside of the world if I'm, you know, with my family and have that.
I feel like white culture has kind of lost their way with the family dynamic.
It has. Like, our family is extremely close. You know, family is like everything.
Would you date a white person?
I have. My dating history with white people and sort of the bullshit that you have to deal with as an Indigenous person.
Dating white people?
Yeah, I remember one time I was dating this person, and I read in their diary. I got into their diary and I read that they said I was stupid. They like wrote that I was like stupid.
No way.
Yeah, and I was like, what the fuck? And it was like this white person who's very like academically like by the book type of thing. And like,
What did you do? Did you confront her?
well, yeah.
What the fuck is this?
Well, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, it was fucked up. I don't think that person's a good person. It's sort of like interesting kind of navigating the dating world, and sort of like, it's weird. I always say that like the only type of people who really like me are white people try and date me, which sucks. I've been single for like a year and a half now, but the last person I dated was white, but they're like one of my good friends still. I want someone who can like challenge me, but also like not be white, if that makes sense.
Challenge you intellectually or know about our history in a meaningful way.
A person of color just that can navigate different spaces with, and sort of like not having to explain why you're being quiet in a room. You know, like some of the times when I was like dating white people, if I wasn't talking, because, you know, I'm usually like a watcher, like I will say, you know, I'll chime in and stuff, but like I remember one time this person was like upset because I wasn't talking, but I was in a room with like a whole bunch of white people, and like regardless of how I feel, it's kind of uncomfortable sometimes, like this whole dynamic that, you know, I think it's because of like history and just sort of all this stuff. And I remember them being like, do you not like my friends? Do you not like this? And I'm like, no, I just don't know how to, like, you guys weren't talking about shit that I wanted to be talking about. Like, I'm just watching you, you know, like I don't want to say anything, like, but it was considered rude. Like, I mean, they were talking about some white shit, and I'm like, I don't know what to bring to this. Like, I have no idea what the fuck you guys are talking about.
What is like a obnoxious stereotype of a white conversation?
I don't know. There's just a lot of shit where like I'll like, even with my friends, like I'll see something and I'll be like, fuck, that's so white. Like, they're so white. But, you know, I'll just like sit back and kind of laugh, and I'm like, damn, they're white.
Like what?
So me and my friends went to a Airbnb outside of Darby, Montana for my friend's birthday, and we were sitting around the table, and then they just started like clapping and singing, and I was like, what the fuck is this? I think it was Toby Keith or something like that, but I was like, actually I thought it was like a church song, because sometimes they'll just like start clapping and like doing church songs, and I'm like, the fuck is this? It was just funny because I was like, what? I was like, is this like from VeggieTales or something? They're like, no, it's Keith Urban or Toby Keith or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay.
Do you like Western culture?
I mean, yeah, there's like stuff that I like in it. It's, I guess, you know, the arts.
Western culture has art that inspires you.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I hosted another debate on whether it was cultural exchange or appropriation. And America's weird. It's defined as this, the United States is weird. It's defined as this melting pot. And it gets accused of appropriating culture all the time. But I think it's because we have no culture. It's this melting pot of all these cultures, and we get into all sorts of trouble trying to find something to latch onto.
People only take the beauty of the cultures. They never want to dive into like everything. They only take what they think is beautiful, you know, whether that's patterns or certain words or spaces. It's not the whole culture. It's just the beauty and sort of like this mystery of what it is.
Wearing it without understanding it.
Yeah, or like, you know, white people smudging. It's sort of this like thing like, well, I'm going to use this because this is what it's supposed to be used for, but not necessarily knowing, or I wouldn't say having the right, because you don't need the right to, but like, you know, it's an indigenous type of thing. There's like this place in Missoula that sells like little smudging packets, or like, you know, the like smudging things, and I'm like, that's stupid.
Should museums hold history and historic value of other cultures?
If I lived back in the day, no. But I think, sadly, there's this need for them. But it's also, I think, giving the artifacts or whatever it is back to the people. I think that's what should be done. I don't see it. I always go back and forth with shit like that, because it's sort of like there's some things that shouldn't be seen, you know? There are reasons why it was buried.
Sacred.
Yeah. There's reasons why it was buried.
Like when people dig up tombs.
Yeah. Like there's reasons why it was buried. They're buried with the people. But if you're talking about like a museum, like the tribes or whatever I think they should have ownership over their own stuff, you know? Like I remember I was shooting a short documentary in California with a woman named Tracy Rector, and it was about a tribe there that only had like 157 members. But they built these, what are they called? They're like, to prevent flooding, they push them up to like the river. When they were building them, they pushed all of this stuff up. So it was like massive graves. So they like pushed all of these indigenous sacred lands up, and they were finding like bones and different artifacts.
Where was this at?
This was in California.
And they were trying to prevent a flood.
Fuck, I can't remember what they're called, but they're built all around different rivers in California. They were finding like beads and all of these like different artifacts. And the tribe was like, those are ours. And then the government's like, no, they're ours. This is our stuff.
This is going to our museum.
The government decided to take control of all of the stuff that they were finding instead of giving it back to the tribe.
And the tribe was there asking for it.
Yeah, they were like, this is our, we should be able to do whatever we want with this, bury it, rebury it, because this stuff is buried for a reason. They call them like dig monitors. The whole story of the film we were doing is sort of like these people who go out and monitor the digging that's going on. So like, say if they come across something, they could stop them and be like, hey, let's not dig here. The people we were shooting with, we're talking about abuse, the verbal abuse they would receive from the people that were digging. White people being like, oh, these fucking Indians in their sacred places, yet they're like their ancestors, their bones are literally right there. It was a really impactful shoot to be on because I've never been a part of anything like that and seen stuff like that.
You mentioned your ex-girlfriend earlier. What's been your experience growing up in the LGBT community?
I didn't really date much in high school. I was more focused on like sports and shit, but I had like little flings here and there, but it wasn't until college where I sort of like really started dating people. It's hard to explain sort of this idea of who I am in a way, because culturally the person that I'm with, ultimately, unless they're Blackfeet and know, like, they'll never understand how I am outside of like what they see me, I guess. Like, I could probably never bring them to a ceremony. I would never bring them to anything like that, a space like that, because that's not meant for them. Like, it would be a disconnect, I think, in a lot of ways.
If the person you wound up dating weren't Blackfeet, there would be a disconnect.
Like I said, like, I grew up traditional and I'm still traditional. I've never been to church. I've never done anything like that. And so it's sort of how I see life and my way of life is so different, and it's very unique in a way that I just haven't found someone who could ever connect to something like that. And I don't know if that would ever happen.
What about your experience with your family? I understand that in a lot of Indigenous culture, the LGBT community is really highly regarded and sacred in some cases, with being Two-Spirit. Is that synonymous through most tribes?
I've never have heard of Two-Spirit until a few years ago. And so my family, of course, they're my family and they'll love me regardless of anything. But culturally, it's totally different from, I'm a proud queer Native person, but culturally I'm totally different. And I know that's my kind of role in that space. And it's not bad. It's just I know how to navigate my queer identity in sort of like an outside society compared to my cultural side.
Are they able to blend culturally?
It's different. It's, like I said, like I'm able to navigate that space because I know what I'm supposed to do in that space.
What keeps you up at night?
The fact that David Fincher didn't win Best Picture for The Social Network in 2009.
Is The Social Network your favorite movie?
No, I'm just kidding. No, I talk about that a lot. I don't know. I don't really know. There's just a lot of stuff, I think about a lot. I think about our film. I think about, honestly, it's mostly just thinking about movies, if I'm being quite honest. David Fincher's my favorite director, and so, I'll just kind of, at night, I watch a lot of movies, and I'll watch, clips and interviews and Oscar speeches and stuff like that. So, there's a lot of shit that keeps me up at night, but I try and not let it get to me.
Are you looking forward to anything tomorrow? Or dreading anything?
As an Indigenous person, we always have a different way of thinking. So it's going to be interesting to hear everyone's, but I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for being here, Ivy. I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
It would be safe to say that an aspect of Ivy MacDonald's passion for filmmaking is about giving voice to the voiceless. In her first feature-length documentary, When They Were Here, which she co-created with fellow filmmaker and brother Ivy MacDonald, Ivy examines MMIW through the compassionate lens of the family that remains. While the film might raise awareness about this often overlooked invisible crisis, its purpose, and likewise MacDonald's, is more about giving these women and girls a sense of humanity, something that they don't get in life, and that without these sacred spaces of memory and communion, they would also be denied in death. The Indigenous population similarly waits for some act of recognition, of reconciliation, and remuneration for roots stolen and sacrificed to the glut of insatiable colonizers that settled America. They too wait for that sense of humanity long denied. Perhaps Ivy MacDonald's next filmmaking move has been made for her. A huge thank you to our supporters: Susan Karstensen, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Last Best Comedy, Hatch, Loken Productions, Ben Johnson Photography, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our media team: Allison Gregory, Pat Loken, Ben Johnson, Jessica Byerly, Shannon Hughes, Nathaniel Johns, Bryant Stersala, and Dylan Weber. Hey, Tate Chamberlain here. Thanks for listening and supporting I Am Interchange. We build our projects to align with the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.